was that's also a synod-affiliated ministry, and there are a number of other ones too that do specific ministries that we support and encourage, but the synod doesn't make decisions about how they do their ministry. Another board does that, so they're called synod-affiliated ministry. And we encourage you to help with all of those. Okay, so that's what we're here to do, is to help guide you in what you want to do. So this particular presentation is really meant to give you a packet of materials for you to kind of refer to down the road should there ever be a situation or time when you might have to touch on these things. And I'm going to tell you right up front that some of these things may not apply to you. And that's okay. Okay? It's really more about just giving you information so that whether you use it or whether you can share it with others, you have some knowledge of what's going on. And you hear these things batted around, these different terminologies, and you might say, well, what is that? I don't know what that is. And so that's what I'm here for, is to answer questions and also to share with you a little bit about what those things are. I do have to tell you that disclaimer that's underneath the ideas to consider spot. It says there, before moving forward with any of these ideas, we do encourage you to discuss them with your tax and financial advisors, since they may not apply to your situation. And that disclaimer is put there to make you understand that I am a pastor, first and foremost. I have been trained in helping people largely with deferred gifts, but also with some of the things that we have here that we're going to be looking at today. But I'm not an expert in these things. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a tax advisor. I am a pastor who happens to know this stuff somewhat, and I can give you some guidance, and I can be a trusted friend who doesn't have a skin in the game. Okay? I'm not making any money off of anything. I get paid by the synod as a pastor. Okay? So that's what I do. So my job is to sit with people and give them advice and encouragement in different ways, but really the best advice you can get is from the professional. Okay? We're doing it as a way for you to safely talk about things and ask questions and not feel like you're paying a lawyer to sit and talk with you, or a tax advisor or anybody else like that. That can cost you a lot of money. It doesn't cost you anything to sit down and talk with me. Okay? So that's why we exist, so that we can help you with those things. And the synod funds that because ultimately it ends up yielding gifts for ministry. Because people do say we want to support the work that the church is doing, and so that's why they fund us, to be able to do those things. Okay. So I'm going to be going through a couple of things that, like I said, may or may not apply to you. So you can, just listen if you want. There's a little bit of space on that front sheet for you to jot down some notes or some questions you might have to ask me about these things. If you raise your hand during the presentation, I'll call on you and I'll be happy to answer a question. And we'll have a time at the end for questions too, if you have any interest in it. Okay. So there is one other thing I would ask that you do. On the back of the packet, this sheet is there. It's entitled Ministry of Christian Giving Feedback Form. I would greatly appreciate it, whether you need my assistance or not, if you would take the time to fill this out. Tear off that sheet and then place it right on your chair is fine, and I'll pick them up right after we're done. That would be very appreciative, because we like to joke that this tells my boss I'm actually doing my job. Because these forms are used to track information a little bit, but the idea here is just to signal me that you might need my assistance, and then I will follow up with you by phone or email, and then say, let's get together or let's talk. We're doing Zoom meetings now with the COVID crisis, so we can set up a Zoom meeting. So I can call you. I actually live in Appleton full time, so if we were to connect and you guys are capable of doing computer or Zoom meetings, we could do a meeting right over Zoom, and I can set that up. It's a secure connection and everything. So there are a bunch of check boxes down below that you can check off if it's something that you have interest in, or you would like to get more information about. And we can start with a phone conversation to see how I can assist you, and then we can go from there. Okay. All right. Number one, the Secure Act. How many people have heard of the Secure Act? Okay. You may or may not know exactly what's involved in the Secure Act, but the Secure Act was something that was passed toward the end of 2019 and was put into effect on January 1st of 2020. It is really something that they use to try to kind of encourage people and to help people with their retirement and to kind of restructure a little bit how retirement stuff is handled. The Secure Act, if you turn to the second page of your notes, that is the one that has the WELS heading on it. It says the Secure Act and qualified charitable distribution. That, I'll explain what those things are as we go through this. But Secure Act stands for Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement. Okay? So this all took place before COVID hit. And the next one we're going to be talking about, the CARES Act, was related to the COVID crisis. So sometimes people get confused and think Secure Act has to do with COVID. It doesn't. It was actually done before COVID was even on the radar. This was really set up as an enhancement for retirement assets. And if you look at the notes here, it says the Secure Act was signed December 20th and went into effect in January 1st. It changes many of the rules governing retirement plans, including several provisions relevant to making charitable IRA rollover gifts, also known as qualified charitable distributions. Now, what is that? How many of you have an IRA? Okay? If you have an IRA, and it has to be a traditional IRA, you are able to take out of that IRA something that's called a qualified charitable distribution. And there's a certain limit you can take out of it every year, but you can take out a portion of your IRA and use it for charitable gifts. So a lot of people, and by the way, you can't do this until you're 70 and a half. You know, they don't allow you to do that. Once you hit 72 now, and that's one of the things the Secure Act did, it changed what used to be 70 and a half, it changed it to 72. There's two different things. A required minimum distribution is an amount that once you turn 72, every year you have to take that amount out. That's because the government wants their money. If you know what an IRA is, the individual retirement account, it was set up so that you could put money into it without paying taxes initially. But then the agreement is when you take it out, you're going to pay taxes, just like it would be income. Okay? So the government's giving you a break on the taxes up front so that it encourages you to save up for your retirement. And then after you retire, you can start taking the money out. But when you take it out, you have to pay taxes on it. And if you take it out before the age of, I think it's 62, I can't remember what the age is, but I think it's 62. If you take it out before the age of 62, you get a penalty. Because they made that agreement that this is meant for your retirement, not just a savings account. So you have to wait until you're a certain age before you can take it out. But then when you take it out, you'll pay taxes on it. Once you hit it used to be 70 and a half, but the Secure Act changed it to 72. Now, when you hit age 72, you are required to take a certain amount out. That's what the required minimum distribution is. So what that means is, and it's done by a percentage that the government sets. And as you get older, it becomes a higher percentage because they want more of the money taken out because they want their taxes before you die. Because once you die, it could be handled differently, and there may or may not be taxes paid on it depending on how you use it. So, the qualified charitable distribution, or QCD, that can be taking, you can use your RMD, the required minimum distribution, for a charitable contribution, and then you don't have to pay taxes on it. And so that's why people think, oh, this is great. Now, let me put a scenario together for you. Jane has an IRA, and she has to take $1,000 out every year because of the required minimum distribution. Okay? So Jane decides, oh, well, I have to take this $1,000 out. I'm going to pay taxes on that $1,000. And Jane normally gives $1,000 to church every year. Doesn't it make sense for Jane to use her IRA distribution that she has to take out for a charitable contribution? Because then she doesn't have to pay taxes on it, right? Because if she takes that $1,000 out, pays the taxes on it, and then ultimately writes out $1,000 in checks to Ascension, she's paying taxes on money that she's giving away. Yes, she'll be able to take a deduction, but now here's the other kicker. You all know that the standard deduction went up, didn't it? The standard deduction used to be a lot smaller. Now it's $12,500 for a single person and almost $25,000 for a couple. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't give $25,000 to charity every year. I'm not blessed with that much income. So you can't deduct the amount you give to church normally unless you give more than $25,000. Okay? So, in this case, because of the special rules that have been enhanced with the Secure Act, Jane can take that $1,000, and if she handles it properly, she cannot receive it to herself directly. She has to make the check out directly to the church from her IRA company. So they have to send it directly to the church, and Pastor Spouty picks it up in the mail and says, oh, here's a check from this investment company that has Jane's IRA, and it's for $1,000, and then he can give it to the treasurer, it can get cashed, and that $1,000 is her annual giving for that year, and she didn't have to pay taxes on it. Now, obviously, it doesn't always work out that the total amount that you have to take out of your IRA is equal to what you would have given to church. But even if you use a portion of it, that's a portion you don't have to pay taxes on, right? So that's why we encourage people who start to get to that age of 70 and a half, or 72 really. 70 and a half is when you're able to start doing qualified charitable distributions. 72 is the age where you have to take the money out, and then you can use it for a qualified charitable distribution. So our encouragement is when you get to that age, and if you have the traditional IRA, that's how you want to handle it for your charitable giving, because it's going to help you tax-wise. Okay?
Does that apply to, pastors are in this 403B thing, which is like a 401k?
Correct.
Is there a same thing with those 401ks?
No, there is not. The government's rules for required minimum distribution, you will have a required minimum distribution, and you will have to pay taxes when you take it out for the 403B. However, you can't use it for a QCD. You have to convert it to an IRA, which you can do. So you can convert a portion of it or all of it if you want to a traditional IRA instead of a 403B. Oh. And that's where you talk to your tax or your investment advisor about that. Because and you don't need to do that until you turn 70 and a half or 72, depending on when you want to start doing these charitable things.
There's a little question about this paragraph, and then the third bulleted item says gifts must come from a traditional or Roth.
Or the Roth. Well, you probably wouldn't necessarily use your Roth IRA account if you're trying to look for a tax benefit, because you've already paid the taxes on a Roth IRA. A Roth IRA is designed so that you pay the taxes up front, it gets put in the savings account, and it's treated like a regular IRA, but you don't have to pay the taxes on the back end. So with the Roth IRA, you don't necessarily want to use that for charitable contributions, because it's not going to, you could, but you don't want to necessarily do it for a tax advantage, because it's not going to. Yeah. So you can only do this with, that's the way the Secure Act was set up and previous to this as well, that the required minimum distribution, the qualified charitable distribution only works with a traditional IRA. But if you have a different tool like a 403B or a 401k, you can convert that to a traditional IRA so that you can do these qualified charitable distributions. Okay? And I don't think there's any major fees involved. I think companies do it pretty simply. It's just a paperwork thing. So, okay? Let's go under those bullet points, though. I'm glad you put that out. I kind of touched on some of this. You must be 70 and a half years old or older at the time of the gift. That's the qualified charitable distribution. Gifts must go directly from your IRA to the charity. So you can't have the check written out to you and then write it out to your charity. It has to go directly to the charity. What we do encourage people to do is have the check sent to them, even though it's written out to their church. And the reason we do that is because, and it's changed now, but when they were first starting this a few years ago, there were a lot of companies who didn't get this. So they would write out the check to you and say, okay, here, you go ahead and use it for your qualified charitable distribution. Well, the government says, sorry, it's written out to you. We don't know what you did with that money, so you have to pay taxes on it. So people were getting nipped because of that with taxes. So we were telling people, it might be wise for you to tell your investment company to send the check to your home, even though it's written out to Ascension. And then you deliver it to your pastor or treasurer. Okay? Because then you can be sure that the check is written out correctly. Because the minute you cash that check, the IRS says, pay our taxes. Okay? I mean, they're gonna make you responsible for paying the taxes. You don't have to pay it right away, but you do for the next tax year. Okay? So, gifts must come from a traditional Roth IRA account, as you mentioned. Gifts cannot exceed $100,000 per donor per year. Now, I don't know how many of you have millions of dollars in an IRA, so it's probably not going to be applicable to you. But there are some people who have some pretty substantial IRAs for whatever reason. And because of that, they have to realize that they can only use $100,000. That's the limit according to the Secure Act. You cannot receive a benefit in return for your gift. For example, you can't give the gift and I use it for the Ascension Lutheran Church Gala that happens every spring. Where you get the big dinner and the show and all that other stuff. That does not count. You can't do that because you're getting a benefit for your gift. So qualified charitable distributions only count when you use them for a true gift that you don't get anything back from. Okay. Now that also applies to a lot of the different tools we're going to be talking about. You can't use them for something like a charitable gift annuity, because a charitable gift annuity gives back to you, and I'll explain that a little bit later in the presentation here. But, so you couldn't use a QCD for that because you're getting something back from it. Okay? So just, you need to be aware of that if you're going to use that. So you can read through the rest of this, the benefits of the charitable gift rollover. It kind of just goes through an example like I did with Jane, and also kind of highlights again why it's a good idea to use it if you can afford it. So that's what the Secure Act is basically. It was setting up the new rules for the charitable gift, for the required minimum distributions in IRA. Make sure I got it. Okay. Any questions on the Secure Act? We're going to move on to the CARES Act, which is the next sheet in your packet. There's a number of bullet points there where it says CARES Act at the top. CARES stands for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. That's the one that was connected. That came out on March 27th, right after COVID started running crazy, and the government stepped up and said, we got to do something about this to help our economy. And so what they did is they did the Aid and Relief and Economic Security Act. Some of you might remember, you might have received a check in the mail from the government for, I think it was $1,200 per taxpayer, right? So that was a result of the CARES Act as well. And as you know, they're also talking right now and kind of battling back and forth about another kind of relief act of some sort for COVID. But they haven't come up with an agreement yet, but it isn't going to be as extensive as what this one was, very likely. Anyway, it was signed into law March 27th, part of the relief package for the U.S. economy. Cash gift deductions were raised to the adjusted gross income. Okay, this is a lot of gobbledygook if you don't know a lot about taxes. Essentially what this means is you used to have a limit on how much you could give in your gift donations annually and deduct. In this particular year, in 2020, because of coronavirus, in order to encourage charitable giving, they said you can give up to 100% of your adjusted gross income on your tax bill, which is really unheard of. That doesn't happen very often. And some people, most people aren't going to give that much to charity, but wealthy people, it can mean a huge amount for them because they deduct a bunch of things and their adjusted gross income might actually equal what their charitable giving is, so they would be responsible for zero taxes. So it's very important for them in that situation, and they did that to spur on the economy, not to give a benefit to wealthy people. It was because there was just a lot behind it, and there was politics too, and I'll admit that, but the bottom line is it was a one-time, one-year thing that they did for 2020. Non-itemizers can claim a $300 deduction. And what that means is, even if you take the standard deduction of $12,500 or $24,000 for a couple, used to be you couldn't deduct anything else, but now they're saying you can do a one-time charitable gift of $300. I'm sorry, not a one-time, but a total gift of $300, and you can deduct it on your taxes. Okay. So again, this is something you want to talk with your tax advisor about. When you're doing your taxes, if you gave money to church, you can deduct up to $300 of the giving that you gave to church, in addition to the standard deduction you had this year. That's just a change that was made with the CARES Act. The required minimum distribution for IRAs was waived. Remember we were talking about that with the Secure Act? Well, this year, nobody has to take out their required minimum distribution. That was one of the extra things that they put in the CARES Act. But that's just for 2020. Now, it is possible before the end of this year, they may come together, although in our political climate, who knows, they might end up getting together with another kind of thing, and they might do it again for 2021. I don't know, we'll have to see. But for right now, in 2020, people who are 72 years old and older do not have to take the R&D this year. So it can stay in your IRA and keep being used. Okay, so that's a benefit also. By the way, if you turn 70 and a half at the end of, on December 31st, 2019, if you were 70 and a half, you still have to take your RMD out at 70, at that age. You didn't get grandfathered in 72. But if you were born on January 1st, 2020, you do not. You understand what that is? That break on that with RMD happened. That transition happened right on that year line. And so if you were born on December 31st or earlier of 2019, I'm sorry, if you turned 70 and a half before then, you would have to continue taking your RMD out, even if you're not 72. If you were turned 72 after January 1st, 2020, then you can take it out at 72. Okay. That's just something we like to mention to people because they don't realize it. Last point, IRA early withdrawal penalties were waived if funds were used for coronavirus purposes. So, for example, you go into the hospital and your insurance doesn't cover the deductible, or your insurance didn't cover extra medical expenses out of pocket. You can use money from your IRA without any penalty, even if you're 40 years old. You are allowed in 2020 to take the money out to pay for coronavirus-related issues. Okay. What those are, you'd have to talk to your tax attorney about. I don't know specifically what qualifies as a coronavirus reason, but, you know, I suppose somebody could argue, well, I had to buy food while I was quarantined. I don't know. You know, you'd have to talk to your tax advisor for that. But that's just something that happened with that. So that's how the CARES Act kicked in, and that adjusted and affected some things temporarily for people, and so we like to bring that on as well. Okay? Any questions on the CARES Act? Okay, let's move on to number 3, the bunching gifts into a donor-advised fund. A donor-advised fund is a special tool that is provided for you. A lot of companies do this. Our WELS Foundation does it as well, and we, Christian Giving Councils, work very closely with the WELS Foundation. They work very closely with the WELS Investments Fund. WELS Investments is the ones responsible for investing. Right now is somewhere in the neighborhood of $260 million of investments that have been brought in through all different means in the synod. You know, whether MLC's got an endowment fund, or whether in some churches, for example. Does Ascension have an endowment fund? Okay. My church, my home church in Appleton, St. Matthew, several years ago, a member gifted $500,000 from his estate to start an endowment fund. And that endowment fund over the years has been managed by a foundation group that we elect every year that takes care of it, was taking care of making investment decisions on that $500,000, and then they had bylaws that indicate how much of that $500,000 or the proceeds of the $500,000 can be used for ministry. So They had rules and regulations they had to follow. But they were working directly with an investor who worked for a company that was investing that $500,000. Recently, they switched over to using the WELS investment funds to invest that money for us. And the costs, because there's so much money invested in WELS investments, the costs for churches go way down from what would it be if they were doing it themselves. The fees are less. So because of that, and also because they do a really good job at the WELS Foundation of getting a return on the investment, they are actually doing, I think it was 2% better. And when you're talking about $500,000 and now it's actually grown to about $800,000, when you're talking about investing $800,000 and getting 2% more than you were getting, that means more ministry's done. So it's a good thing to consider if a church has an endowment fund, to consider having it. You still have access to it. You still can decide how things are done, but ultimately you're just letting the WELS Investments do the investing, and they have their own board who makes these decisions, advised by Vanguard and experts at Vanguard, and it's just a really well done situation. They're very open about it, but they do a really great job of it. So anyway, the donor advised fund, getting back to that, is a gift that you can do. It starts at $10,000, and you can give additional money over the years if you want, but you have to start it with at least $10,000. A donor advised fund is a fund that allows you to invest the money, and then you can advise the foundation where you want it to be used for ministry. That's why it's called a donor advised fund. It has to be called advised because technically when you donate the money, it becomes a donation. So if you take $10,000 and you write a check to the WELS Foundation to establish a donor advised fund, you are giving that $10,000 gift. You can deduct that gift if you want to, if it helps you in your tax situation, and sometimes people do that. But it allows you to choose later when you want to use the gift for ministry. So you can call them up and say, or email, you can do it online. You can go and say, I want $500 to go to MLC this year. I want $1,000 to go to Ascension this year, or this month, or whatever. You can do that anytime you want with that money that you put in there. But it's not money you can take back. It's not like a savings account. It's a donation. But it's called a donor advised fund because they're investing it, and when it's not being used, it's making a lot more money than it would in a savings account for you. It's making like somewhere in the neighborhood of 8% per year on average. And because of that, the money's growing slightly, but then you can take money out of it anytime you want and use it for any ministry purpose you want. So that's what a donor advised fund is. And that can be a tool for some people to do what's called bunching. Now, why would you do bunching? Well, let's say you have your tax advisor says to you, you sold some stock and you're getting, if you sell this stock, you're going to have to pay, you've got a $20,000 capital gains, and so you're going to have to pay taxes on that, and that's at this tax rate, and you don't want to pay that tax bill if you can avoid it. Is there some charitable way that you can use this money to avoid the tax situation for you? A donor advised fund might be an option. So you could call me up and say, or Pastor Dietz and say, hey, we'd like to talk about a donor advised fund. I've got some money I'd like to put into it. And you can actually transfer securities or whatever it is that you have and put them in. And to the government, it is as if it were a donation, okay, a charitable donation. So you can deduct it that way. Now, what do we call it bunching? Because obviously, if you're a married couple and you don't give $25,000, you can't, you're not going to deduct it. But in 1 year, you might have enough resources that you could donate it all at once. And in that tax year, you don't take the standard deduction. You take a deduction for $30,000 because you have given that $30,000 to a donor advised fund. And in that year, you don't have to use all the money and give it to a one charity all at once. You could put it in a donor advised fund and trickle it out whenever you want in future years. But for that one tax year, you bunch together that big donation that would help you tax-wise and become a charitable donation greater than the standard deduction. Okay, I got questions. I hope I explained it right, or maybe I've been confused.
Do they or do you anticipate any of these plans evaporating
Well, the CARES Act is only temporary.
No, I mean, just what you're talking about.
Oh, the donor advised fund and the bunching? No, that won't go away. You can always do that. That's always available to you, that hasn't changed, and that wasn't a change with the other two. The Secure Act made permanent changes to retirement and stuff, and that isn't gonna change until government decides to change it. The CARES Act is temporary, yeah. Well,
Do you anticipate any of these in danger?
I don't, not a bunching, not the bunching.
Okay.
That's just a tax smart way of doing things. And you have to work with your tax advisor and, of course, the WELS Foundation through us to accomplish the donor advised fund. So that can work for certain people in certain situations. And my advice would be, if you think you might have a use for something like this, call me up or talk with me, because I'm more than happy to talk through your specific situation to see if it's right. Okay? That's the best way to do it. But as far as your question, the government's not going to change the bunching ability, because to them it's just a charitable donation. The reason why we call it bunching is because normally you might give this over 5 years, because before the deduction was much lower, the standard deduction was much lower. Now because it's so high, many people don't reach that threshold unless they bunch together all the gifts they were going to give over 5 years into one donation. Then it benefits them in one tax year, and then they can use the next 5 years to dole it out as they see fit, you know, through the donor advised fund. That's just a way you can do that. Okay. So to that specific thing, no, but with the CARES Act, that's going to go away after 2020 unless they renew it or issue a new one with some different rules, and then we'd have to meet again and talk about it. But the Secure Act was made permanent. That was left as it was.
So two little questions. Did you say WELS Investment Funds manages these?
Yes.
donor- And then the other question was, what if you donate the money and then the advisors, whoever donated, pass away, then what happens to the money? Is it-
There are contingencies in the application where you can pass it off to your kids if you want. Or there's also a contingency for if you don't have kids or you choose not to, or your kids don't want to or whatever, you could just have it given in one lump sum at that time and distribute it however you see fit.
Oh.
Okay, so yeah, when you set it up, you set that in.
Okay.
I will tell you, kind of interesting you mentioned with the family, a lot of families I've talked to use donor advised funds to talk with their kids about missions. So they say even when their kids are younger, before they're adults, they'll say, we have this donor advised fund, and every year we're going to give $1,000 out of it to some ministry. Hey kids, let's sit down and let's talk about the different ministries we can give it to. And now, not only are you helping them talk about the missions, but you're also saying, this is a good thing to do. We're using this donor advised fund. When you're an adult and have some money, maybe you might want to do this too. Or pass it off to them. Yes.
Because you said, okay, so you donated 10,000 and then it's at 8%. Is your,
That's on average. That's on
right,
average.
I mean, is your ability, do you only have the 10,000 to stay where it goes? The extra
No,
money
it continues to grow.
Oh, so
So
that
you
is
get a
all
statement.
Oh, okay.
You get a statement, I think it's either quarterly or annually, I can't remember which, because
Okay.
there's other things. But you get a statement that says this is how much it's in your donor advised fund.
Okay,
And it keeps growing, and
right.
so you still have that money to use, yeah.
Okay.
Because they're not using the money. The only thing they're gonna be doing is there's gonna be a small fee that is taken out of it because there's a cost to doing all the work.
Oh,
you
yeah,
know?
and that's why I didn't know
Yeah.
if that extra was, you know, then they were gonna designate it to things too, and you just had.
Yeah, no, it's all it's just like, it would be just like a savings account that's continuing to grow,
Okay.
and you would have the ability to share. Okay, any other questions on the donor advised fund? Then we'll move along to number 4. What is a charitable gift annuity and a charitable remainder trust, and what can they do for you and your children? Well, I'd like you to look at the next page on your packet where it says a gift that pays income to you and your loved one. A charitable gift annuity is a gift that you can use for your And by the way, I've got these books available for you. Some of this stuff is explained in here. The donor advised fund is explained in here. The charitable gift annuity and charitable remainder trust, which I'll be talking about here, are also included in here too. So take one of these if you have an interest in learning more about them. A gift annuity is initially, you give a large gift, and then when you reach a certain age, then at that age you start getting an annual payment from that, which is called an annuity, and it's a percentage of what you donated, and it's given back to you in quarterly payments. So the minimum that for a charitable gift annuity is $10,000, and then so a lot of people use these who want to do this kind of a thing, because $10,000 and up is a lot easier for most people, because a charitable remainder trust requires a minimum of $100,000, and I'll explain that in a little bit. They're both kind of the same concept, but they're a little bit different tool. The CGA is a tool that you can use if you have a large amount of money, and a lot of times this is what will happen. You'll sell a house and have a bunch of capital gains to pay on. Well, you can make a donation, and if you wanted to, you could establish a charitable gift annuity, and when you do that, that can offset the capital gains because it's considered a charitable donation for about 40, is it 60? I think it's about 60% of it is considered a charitable donation. That's why if you look at that, on that diagram, that's on that sheet that you're looking at. If you give a gift of $10,000, you look at the bottom, number 2, it says there a tax deduction is $4,268, so it's about 40%. You get about 40% of it back as a tax deduction, because the rest of it, depending on when you donated it, because of your age, the government knows you're going to get paid back. So they're not going to give you a tax deduction for the money that you're going to be getting back. So they have a formula that they use depending on how much you donate for the CGA, and then what your age is. So they punch that all in. And then what happens is after you go to heaven, the remainder, the charitable gift annuity, goes to whatever charity or charities you want. And I help you fill out a form called a letter of instruction that directs it. So you donated $10,000, you get a payment for the rest of your life after age 62, I think it is when it starts. You can start it whenever you want, but minimum is 62. You get that annual payment in quarterly installments from that annuity, and that is guaranteed to you and your spouse for life. Once your spouse passes and you've gone, then whatever's left in that charitable gift annuity gets donated and directed to wherever you want it to go. Okay? That's pretty much the 40% that the government gave you the discount on, or the tax break on. Okay? That's why the $4,000 is considered a tax deduction. Now, at $10,000, that doesn't seem like a lot, but there are people who make charitable gift annuities for 25, 30, 50, whatever, and when they do that, it pays them obviously more in the annuity, but then it also gives a larger tax deduction because it's a larger amount of money. And depending on your situation, it might be something that's a good tool for you to use. A CGA is a very simple process. It's a form that we fill out together, and once it's filled out, it's filed with your check. It starts, and at the day you want it to start, it kicks in and starts paying you the quarterly payments. So it's a really fairly simple process. And what happens with that money that you donated is it gets invested in WELS investments, and then the return keeps building up. They keep paying you, and they figured out how much you get paid. It's like 5%, 5.2% or something like that, depending on your age. And then because obviously as you get older, you're going to live less time, and so they don't have as much to pay out. So they pay a little bit larger portion for older people, depending on when you start taking it. So those are all things that we have to figure out when we sit down again. But that's a charitable gift annuity. It's a gift that gives to you in retirement, but then ultimately gives to the Lord as well. And you can also do what's called a legacy CGA, which would set it up so that when you die, the money goes into it, and then it starts paying your kids for up to 20 years. So it's a way to use your assets when you pass to have them be funneled into a CGA, or if it's a larger amount, CRT, and then that can pay your children in those quarterly payments for up to 20 years. Now, why is that important? Because one of the rules changes that was made in the Secure Act, which I neglected to mention before, is that it used to be with your IRAs, your kids could take those out over their lifetimes when you left them, when you willed them to them. So if you had a beneficiary designation for your IRA to your children, or I'm just going to use one child. You have one child, you designate it to your child, and they get control of the IRA. As they take money out, they have to pay the taxes on it as income, because that's the agreement you made when you first put the money in. So the government wants its cut. However, it used to be they could take it out for the rest of their lifetime, for their life expectancy. But with the Secure Act, that changed and said now they have to take all the amount out within 10 years. Now, for some people who have a smaller amount in their IRA, it's not a big deal for 10 years to take it out. But if you've got $1 million in your IRA and the kids have to take it out in 10 years, you can imagine what that's going to do to their taxes every year, right? Because whether they take it out each year or whether they take it out all at the end, there's going to be a huge tax event for them. And it's going to bump them up into a higher tax bracket, which makes it a lot harder for them to pay their taxes. And it affects all of their assets and all of their taxable stuff. So the charitable gift annuity and a charitable remainder trust, setting it up for your kids in the future, is sometimes a smart thing to do because it gives them up to 20 years to take it out and spend it. So it can spread it out over more. Yeah.
That interest, it says payment rate 5.8, does that change with prevailing financial conditions?
That is set by the American Council on Gift Annuities. It is up every periodically. They look at the whole picture, and what they're doing with that 5.8%, that is a set figure that we use from them, or I should say WELS Foundation uses from them. And the reason they do that is because they figure it out based on life expectancies and everything else, so that the charitable gift annuity doesn't dwindle to nothing. Because then what's the point, right? Why have a charitable gift annuity if it's not going to be charity? So they are talking, they look at, for all of the charitable beneficiaries throughout the country, they look at this and they say, if you want to make sure you're making enough in the market, the way we've analyzed the market, what it's been doing, and what we expect it's going to do, coupled with life expectancy for people, and so this is the amount that it's at. It's set at 5.8. This just went down, I think it was a percent or 1.25%, I think it went down in July 1st of this year. And that was the first adjustment in a couple of years, I think. So, just so you know, that 5.8% is what it is now, but it can change depending on what the American Council on Gift Annuities does.
So in your experience, what has it gone, like from 4 to 8? Or?
Oh, it's usually right in that 5.8 range. It's very small adjustments. They don't make huge adjustments. So, and it, you know, they just don't. I mean, it may be a point or two at most, but it doesn't go way down unless there would be like a depression and the markets would tank so bad for a long period of time, then it might go way down. And then it would go back up if the markets went back up. So all that stuff is weighed in. But for fiduciary reasons, the WELS Foundation uses the American Council on Gift Annuities figure so that they're not playing games with their own stuff. They're not saying, oh, well, you know, they're not putting themselves at risk either because they've made an agreement, we're going to make this payment until you pass, regardless of how long you live. So they have to make sure they're covering their bases so that they're not losing money. They've got a reserve fund that makes sure that it's all protected and everything. They've done all that study. So, that's why they use that. Okay, so a charitable remainder trust is basically the same thing as a CGA, except it involves larger amounts of money. So it's a wiser thing to do if you've got $100,000 or more to put into it. Some people think, well, when am I ever going to have $100,000? But it happens. If you own a farm, for example, and the farm was given to you by Grandpa when it was worth, at the time when he purchased it, you know, $100 an acre. Now it's worth $14,000 an acre. And you decide, I'm out of the farming business, I'm selling the farm. You have to pay capital gains on the $100, what used to be $100 and what the farm was worth then, to what it's worth now at $14,000 an acre. You see the difference? That's a huge capital gains hit. And when you sit down with a farm tax attorney who's telling you you're going to be in big trouble because of the situation with this particular farm, and he says, is there something you can do to help with this? That's when you come and call us and say, can we talk about a charitable remainder trust? Why? Because if you set that up, it will give you a very substantial amount. Basically what happens is the farm is sold, put into the charitable remainder trust, and then you start getting paid from that annually. And yes, you pay taxes on what you receive as income, but it's a lot better than the capital gains hit that you'll take, which is, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%. I mean, it's really, difficult for people. And so that's why, the CRTs could be a great benefit for people who are in those kinds of tax situations. Other people use CRTs because they just work better for the way their assets are. And the thing about a CRT is it's a legal document, so it's a trust document. So it has to be approved by your lawyer. So there's a cost involved with that because you got to take it to your lawyer and have them look it over, make sure it's all appropriate.
And with a charitable remainder trust, is there also a legacy charitable
Yes,
remainder trust?
correct, yep. You can also set that up as well. So that your assets would be dumped into the trust. Just so you know, a trust is basically a legal bucket where everything gets dumped into it at one point in time. Some people have what's called a revocable living trust, which is the same thing as a will, only it's a little more involved. It's set up as a trust so that all of your assets, your house, everything that you own, when you pass away, go into this trust, which is that bucket, and then your trust designates what's done, and your trustee, the person who you designate, is the one who decides or makes sure everything goes where you wanted it to go. It basically does all of your estate work up front instead of when you die.
What was that called?
That's called a revocable living trust. That is more costly when you set it up with a lawyer because there's more work involved front end. But ultimately, it's the same work that's going to be done for your estate when you pass, if you have a simple will. It's got to go through probate, you've got to prove all this stuff, and your will is going to designate where everything goes. And then your personal representative or executor makes sure that stuff is carried out.
What's the difference between revocable and irrevocable? I've heard
Well, an irrevocable gift means it can't be changed.
Oh,
Revocable means it can be. So when you do a revocable living trust, it means that if I want to make a change, I can do that. Call up the lawyer and say I want to make an adjustment.
I see.
An irrevocable trust is you can't change it. Once it's done, it's done.
While you're living, you can't make any changes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
But your revocable living trust becomes irrevocable once you die.
I see.
It can't be changed. Because you're dead. There you go. Makes sense. The last thing, number 5, what's the status of your Christian estate plan? That is on that page that says CARES Act on the top. If you look real quickly, I'll just run through this. Do you have a will or revocable living trust? When was it last reviewed? Remember too that you could put a Christian preamble in your documents. That's a really important thing. That's an opportunity for all of your legal people, your family, and everybody who ever looks at the will gets to see your statement of faith. And that's something that lawyers will put in for free, and we can help you put one of those together if you want. So if you need help with any of those, check off the box on that response sheet, and I will get in touch with you and we can start talking about how I can help you. Powers of attorney. If you don't know what a power of attorney is, that is a document that determines who makes decisions for you if you become incapacitated. So if you're in a car accident and you're in a coma, or you get Alzheimer's and you can't make decisions for yourself, powers of attorney kick in while you're still living. Everybody who's an adult, age 18, needs one of these. Especially, for example, if your kids go away to school. If they're away to school and they get involved in a car accident and medical decisions have to be made, mom and dad don't necessarily get to make those decisions. Legally, a doctor can make those decisions for you or for your child, because your child doesn't have a power of attorney. So your children need those powers of attorney. Those can be done through a lawyer, but you can also do them yourself. There are forms available online. I can send you forms if you'd like, and by email, and you can fill them out yourself. A power of attorney for health care needs 2 witnesses to sign it. That's it. So you need to sign in front of 2 witnesses. A power of attorney, a durable power of attorney for financial matters, that's handling your accounts and paying checks and signing checks, those kinds of things. Depositing checks, all that stuff. That's a durable or financial power of attorney. That needs a notary to sign off on. And you can get those at your local bank. They'll do those there. Unless you know somebody who's a notary. But that needs a notary sign. So you can get one of those, but we usually tell people if you don't have powers of attorney and you don't have a will, get connected with a lawyer and get those taken care of, because the lawyer will usually do it all in a package deal. Because you gotta have you gotta have a notary. You gotta have a notary sign the will too, so you might as well do the powers of attorney at the same time. So you need those powers of attorney if you don't have them. The one that says medical directives, that's a different document that basically guides your power of attorney to make decisions for you. So do I get a feeding tube? Do I not get a feeding tube? Do I have a DNR? Do I not resuscitate? Those kinds of things. That's what's in the medical directive. Christian Life Resources has a document that is a Christian power of attorney as well as a Christian medical directives. And it's a really nice document that I can easily send you if you want, or you can get it on the website at clr.org, I think it is. You can download that and enter the information yourself and get it signed. The reason you do that is because that one has been vetted by Christian Life Resources to make sure the medical directives are in line with what Scripture would say. You know, so you're not just making an emotional decision, you're making what would be a scriptural decision in the event of something happening. Okay. Coordinating beneficiary designations. You have those on life insurance and retirement accounts that are listed there. You have to give them beneficiary designations. If they're taxable documents like an IRA or 403B or 401Ks, a lot of times it is a benefit to you if you want to have charity done through your will to use your beneficiary designations to accomplish that. Those override the will. Those direct those funds to wherever you want them to go, apart from your will. Okay? So it's a much faster process, but it also helps you out tax-wise, or your estate tax-wise. Because if your IRA goes to your kids, it's taxable for them. If your house or your life insurance goes to your kids, that is not taxable for them. Okay? So it makes sense to figure out your resources in your estate plan to make sure that as much of the taxable resources is doing whatever charitable work you want to do as possible, because that's going to benefit your estate and your family. Okay? That's what we would talk about as we sit down and work on estate plan. And I can do that with you as well. The last bullet point there, payable on death is for bank funds, transfer on death is investment funds, and transfer on death deed for real estate. All of those things are basically official documents that you can get taken care of that handle beneficiary designations for those items. Okay. That's what those are. So those are just, they don't normally require you to have a beneficiary designation for those things, but you can get them if you want. And that's what the last bullet point is. So basic question here is, how is your estate plan? Where is it at? Has it been reviewed in the last 5 years or so? If you haven't, talk to me. I'm more than happy to help you with it, and we can answer some questions for you. I can sit at your kitchen table and talk with you. Okay, that is what I have for the presentation. I do want to make available to you one of these books if you want it. I'm going to leave them. I think I'm just going to leave them up here. So you can come up and get them if you want. I have cards here for me if you would like. Take one of the cards if you want to contact me. And then also, please fill out that sheet and just leave it on your chair. Or better yet, would you bring it up here and just put it on a pile? That would be great. That way, I have a record that you were here with me, and also if you need any assistance, I've got you checked off the box there for me to contact me. Okay? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Professor, just had a question. Quite a few of our people aren't here today, so could you leave some of this material?
I'll leave some of these, as
okay.
well as some of that. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, we thank you very much, Pastor Mielke, for making the trip and for preaching and everything. We really appreciate it. So, why don't we just have a short prayer, okay? So, dear God, we thank you for Pastor Mielke's presence here today and for the word of God that he will give us in the second service and that he gave us in the first service. We also thank you for his offer to help. So help us to think seriously about the blessings that you've given us and how to manage them to your glory. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks.